we're going to get started here. Thanks a lot to Eric and the YUI Yahoo crew for inviting us and the panelists here to chat with you guys tonight. My name's Dion Almaer.
I'm Ben Galbraith, and we would love to introduce you to the panelists and then get straight to the questions. The way we're going to run this is we've got some stock questions here, but we'd really love to get to your questions. So I think we're going to run the questions for a few minutes, 20, 30 minutes, see how it goes. And then we'll give you a couple minutes warning to queue up at the mic and then direct it to you. So we're going to go through the panelists from my left all the way down, and we're going to start with Tantek. Tantek, how do you say your last name, Tanta?
Chelik.
Chelik.
Yeah.
Tantek Chelik. I think first rose to fame by working with Microsoft on IE5.5 and was responsible for the amazing CSS support that browser had. And I don't say that in jest. It actually was renowned for great CSS support, one of the first browsers to have great CSS support. It's been active in web standards for over 12 years, was an independent, and up until very recently when he joined Mozilla, and now actively works with standards groups at Mozilla.
Next in we have Joe Hewitt, who was part of the original Firefox team over at Netscape Mozilla, and then helped us all out by creating Firebug, which has been a big boon to the developer community. Yes, indeed. And then he went to the dark side and went over to iPhone development to build Facebook for iPhone and do some great stuff on that side of the fence. So he can give us a really interesting view for front-end development, kind of spanning the web and into other platforms that are out there.
Rabid Apple fan. Rabid Apple fan. So next to Joe is Elaine Wary of Meebo. She's actually a co-founder of Meebo, and she built the initial JavaScript framework that powered Meebo. And so she's very technical, but at the same time, she now leads the web product teams at Meebo. So she gives us a wealth of perspective both on the practitioner implementation side and also on the startup management side. So we're excited to have Elaine on the panel.
Doug Crockford needs no introduction. He's the Chuck Norris of our industry. At crockfordfacts.com, created that JSON thing, does a little bit of JavaScript here and there, evangelizes some things for Yahoo, and we're pleased to have an ornery old guy on the panel with us tonight.
Next to Doug is Thomas Shaw. Thomas Shaw is a co-founder of YUI. I haven't met Thomas before, and I said, Thomas, tell me something else about you I can use to introduce you to the group, and he said, nope. So Thomas, the YUI founder, is there. We're excited to have you on the panel.
JavaScript has had a long, storied history trying to reach over to the server. Netscape tried to do it a long time ago. But Ryan created Node, which has been the first successful JavaScript implementation on the server. And so we're glad to have someone on the JavaScript side on the server to chat about kind of that worldview. Not really front-end engineering, but JavaScript-centric. So we're excited to have Ryan here. Cool. So we'll get going right away. This is to the panel, but I'll kind of ask Joe this question to begin with. As someone who did so much for the web and then moved to iOS, as we kind of think about building these really rich, compelling experiences and applications for the web, and there's these large app economies outside of the web, what do you think when you look at the web platform these days? And kind of bidirectionally, what do you miss about the web when you're doing development in other platforms? And kind of the other way around, what would you like to see the web gain?
I mean, you could talk about the features that are missing from the web, but I think the thing that's missing the most right now is just sort of confidence that the web is going to stay on the cutting edge. When you look at the native app platforms, every year or every 6 months, they get a major bump. They get all the cutting edge hardware features. They get all kinds of new toys, and the web kind of chugs along slowly, and there's a lot of factors slowing it down. But ultimately, when you're developing native apps, you have that confidence that you're always going to be able to do as much as the device you're programming for can do. And on the web, you don't have that confidence. Some examples is just being, here we are 3-4 years into the touchscreen mobile world, and we still can't on the web snap a picture and upload it. I don't know why that is, but that's the kind of thing you have to contend with as a web developer these days.
Cool. And then open it up to the rest of the panel. What are the things that you wish you had in the web platform? Like Elaine, you've had to, in building out Meebo, you had to kind of deal with the web platform's limitations and great things.
Yeah,
what do you wish you could see?
Absolutely. I think the thing that's interesting about developing for the web is that the web was initially conceived of, I don't know, the first browsers from the 1990s or so, right? And the first purpose of the web was really to be able to display information. It was it was intended for directories of links. It was intended for showing text and showing pictures. And in some ways, today, if we just look at the browser and we look at, hey, we have the forward button, we have the previous button, you scroll through pages, the metaphor of a book, which was the document viewing medium that the browser was initially conceived of, is still there. And so now when we're trying to build things that are more application-centric, and we're trying to do things with things that are more interactive, things that are more app-centric, we run into limitations because the browser just wasn't intended for that initially. And so when I'm looking at things that I'm really excited about, I look at it from more of a product perspective and looking for things to become easier for the user to understand some of the privacy controls. I look at things like the URL shorteners. I look at the way that we're handling cookies and local storage. And we keep trying to push a lot of these things to be able to handle more robust applications. And those are the things that I hope become more tied to the browser.
So Tentech, you work both with the standards groups and with Mozilla in augmenting that browser's capabilities. And I think Joe and Elaine raised some interesting points about sort of the limitations of browsers relative to native platforms. I wanted to pick up with what was said about the distinction between documents and apps. Is that your perspective? Do you see that perspective in the standards bodies about two separate classes of experiences in browsers, documents and apps, or do you see that as more blended?
I think for a long time there's been that sort of separation. Like you can trust documents; they're not going to screw up your computer. You never know what an app is going to do that you download, that kind of thing. But I think the web has taught us that that's not a cut and dry distinction. That there are documents that have a little bit of dynamic functionality, and then there are applications that are mostly books too, right? So where do you draw the line? I don't know. I think that both Joe and Elaine have good points, and I think that perhaps the web's biggest disadvantage is that it doesn't have some major company putting on a big dog and pony show once a year that's saying, oh, the web is awesome, we're going to launch the next version of the web. Right? Everyone upgrade their devices, it's all ready for you. No, the web works kind of the way evolution works, which is that it's slow, it's inconsistent, and it happens, it leaps forward in spurts that you never know exactly when what's going to advance. So the interesting thing there, though, is that today's web is actually far more powerful than what your phone could do 5 years ago. And I think people forget that.
Doug, we talked a little bit about, giving the web capabilities that are only available in native browsers, and Joe in particular, native platforms. And Joe in particular voiced frustration about not being able to take a picture and upload it. I know you've been speaking out a lot in terms of being careful about expanding the web's capabilities before it's really secure. You want to speak a little bit to your perspective on whether the web should gain these native capabilities?
Yeah. So the web necessarily is always going to lag technologically behind everything else. That's the nature of the beast. But there are trade-offs that you get that offset that. The major one being portability, in that you've got a much better likelihood of being able to run across all devices than you have trying to port against all of the proprietary platforms. The other advantage the web has is that it is closer to being a secure platform than everything else. And one of the trade-offs for that is that it's going to be less powerful with respect to certain features. But it also means that people can have more confidence that if they're running something in the browser context, then it's not going to destroy the machines. It's not going to steal their identity. Particularly as we're finding ways of storing your wealth in your phone and taking that with you, you don't want software to possibly rob you. And the web is more likely to allow you to have confidence about the stuff that you're shoving in your pocket.
Huh. That's a great soundbite. You don't want the web to rob you. So Joe, if the web just has to lag behind native platforms in terms of capabilities, and you're trying to build sort of the next generation of app experiences or user experiences, do you think you'll ever be happy with the web? Do you think it's possible that the web will give you what you need to deliver those great experiences that you want to build?
Over time, the web will get more of the features that people want. But in the meantime, I think the App Store phenomenon shows developers are sort of voting. There's just been, especially in the mobile space, there's just been so much more interesting stuff happening with native apps. And over time, the web will catch up. I don't know how long it's going to be. I think right now there are a lot of, conversely, there are a lot of apps that people are writing natively that probably shouldn't be native apps, like a lot of these news and magazine apps, where that you lose all the cool like linkability that you have on the web. And over time, I think those will actually go back to the web.
So how long is it going to be until we get some of these native abilities into our browser runtimes, do you think?
Wish I knew.
Looking to the standardistas here.
It's dangerous to predict when standards are going to get done. I mean, standards work necessarily should be slow and cautious. Any standard that's done quickly is probably going to have stupid stuff in it, and you'll pay for it in the future.
So shifting gears a little bit, we're here at Yahoo, and we've been talking about the platform evolution and browser evolution. I wonder, Thomas, if you could just talk to us a little bit about where you see YUI going in the future. And sort of leading up to this, there was a recent thread on Quora talking about, how can YUI market itself better? How can it sort of let the world know about its capabilities? And I think John Ressig weighed in a little bit on that too. So I wonder, from like a technical front, if you can sort of kick off a discussion about where YUI is headed as a framework, and also sort of your thoughts on how YUI can be sort of more effectively marketed.
I think from just the conference itself and the various technical tracks that you've seen today, it should be a re-emphasis that the investment in YUI and the research and effort into new domains such as server-side JavaScript is not just hearsay, and it's certainly superseding beyond merely research. It's a significant investment and effort to make sure that this works and works right. So as for our longevity, we're pretty much putting a bet on it. So I seriously doubt that this would be a short-term effort. There are a lot of technologies and a lot of efforts being discussed throughout these tracks that are probably still in their infancy. So before we bear fruit, there's still a lot more to do. And as for your question on where or what we need to do to be more prominent, to be more visible, I think that answer is not so much what YUI and the team can do or Yahoo can do, but rather the gallery infrastructure that we've put together is the culmination of that effort. It's the ability for any individual contributor to put a module into this gallery space and be treated as a first-class citizen amongst any of the other canonical components and allow a developer to come in and use that seamlessly. The ability to contribute that, provide its documentation, or go one step further and deploy it straight to the CDN. You get the benefit and the scalability of our own infrastructure. The ability to attract users should be through the ability or the means to use it, rather than to continue to market and espouse it. Demonstrate that it's easy to use, and you have access to that scalability that powers the rest of Yahoo, and it's literally an invitation or an open door to the ecosystem.
Okay, so there's a bunch of YUI fans here in the web development community. You touched on some of these things, but as the evangelist here, go speak to the broader community. Someone comes up and says, why should I use YUI? What's kind of the elevator pitch?
Well, that's a very interesting question. Why use YUI? It's predicated largely on how you use JavaScript today. If you want an ecosystem, or if you want a JavaScript to run in such a fashion that it's not just only modular, but also developed with performance and security in mind, those are some fairly important touch points. The ability for YUI or for a YUI developer to specify specific functionality and capability and load it into a self-contained sandbox is a fairly unique concept. And that in itself is a very attractive starting point. As for why else you should use it, look around Yahoo. The demonstration is on some of the front page properties that we deploy. It demonstrates the capabilities from the very simple, from the very easy, to the highly complex mail application that Yahoo puts out. So it does run the entire spectrum, from not only just the technical aspects of how you would use YUI, but demonstrated in an applied capability.
Great. So Ryan, to touch on the server a little bit, at the beginning talked about how there's been this bit of a dream to go back to kind of maybe a small talk-like world where you have the same language running everywhere, and never took off on the Netscape world all the way up to JAXA until Node. What is it about Node that you think kind of sparked out this community? And where do you see Node fitting in with kind of the client-side world and how these worlds could work together?
Yeah, so I think the reason that Node is so popular is that it uses JavaScript kind of in the way that it was intended. And coincidentally, that turns out to be exactly the same way that you want to be writing servers. And it's just, we've kind of had this disconnect, which is a bit strange because kind of the same people writing the servers were also writing the client-side stuff. But this sort of single-threaded event loop programming style is exactly how you want to be writing your server. And so I think that realization that these two worlds combined, not with, hammers and nails and, bleeding feet and this sort of thing, but just kind of beautifully and just, wow, okay, it just kind of works that way, was kind of an epiphany, and it seems to work well that way. How does it integrate with the client-side world? Well, I mean, Node is not new in that it brings these sort of low latency, real-time applications to the web, but it does kind of bring that to a more broader audience, right? Because they can just use JavaScript, and it's kind of this completely non-blocking world that they live in, so they don't need to know so much about the landscape of server-side programming. It's kind of all pillows and beds around them. So they can just kind of run around and jump and build real-time apps, which I think, I think Node is contributing to the web going real-time.
So Ron, I've heard a characterization of you as more a C, C++ developer, less a JavaScript developer. How do you feel JavaScript is suited for this application of server-side development? Now that you've spent a lot of time on it, are you really happy with the synergies that have emerged, or do you look at that and go, this really isn't the marriage that I thought it could be?
I mean, I have a love-hate relationship with JavaScript because, and I think everybody does, because I mean, on one hand, it's just this awful language, and it's really, it's disturbing that we would use it, but I mean, on the other hand, it's kind of a nice language, right? I mean, what's nice about it is that it doesn't have too many features. And I was just telling Doug before the talk that, I've seen some of these presentations about the new features that ECMAScript is adding, like the proxies and stuff. And I mean, in my opinion, we've gone too far with getters and setters. Like, I like explicit code execution. I don't like to just call something and, magically, like, stuff happens. For the same reason that I don't like C++, I mean, you initialize a static variable and whoa, like magic constructors start like happening all over the place. And so you just have a lot less control over what is actually happening in your or just like visually seeing it, right? In C, you can visually look at it and say, okay, code happens here and code execution happens there. That said, I mean, JavaScript is we make software for humans, right? And so JavaScript is a very human language to program in because it's so widely known. And for that reason, it's very appropriate. And it's also nice that it doesn't have any preconceived notions of how to do server-side things. So it was very easy to kind of hook together with my own notions of how to do that. So in that way, JavaScript has been beautiful.
Yeah, so it seems like someone should write a book on maybe just the good parts of the language.
That would be a great.
So Ryan said a couple of things that I'd love to get your reaction on, Doug. One of them is just his characterization of the language, and I'd love to see if that dovetails with your own view.
You may recall, just a couple of years ago, there was the ES4 debate. There was consideration of significantly enlarging the feature set in JavaScript. There are even people out there demanding that we have threads added to the language. I don't know if you remember that. Unfortunately, we resisted all of that stuff, and instead we produced a standard which attempted to repair some of the worst features of the language to the extent that it's possible to repair mistakes on the web and not overcomplicate it. And I think we're much better off today for having done that. So I'm very sympathetic with his notion that we shouldn't be adding more stuff to this language, particularly stuff that is not necessary.
So Doug, the second part is that, Ryan and the Node community have been extending what's possible in JavaScript, such as binary data types and other things, to fit their needs in the server community. How does that dovetail with what the ECMA standards body is doing? And how do you feel about the direction that this is going? And sort of the postscript to that is, will it ever sort of unify back up to the client, or are we going to have these sort of different environments?
It's not clear. So I like the approach that he took for adding buffers, for example, to the Node.js server, and that he didn't extend the language, he just added new capabilities that are in the environment. So you can ask for a buffer and it makes it for you, and it has an interface, and you can manipulate it, and you can pass it around. And the JavaScript language already likes that kind of stuff. So that's a better approach, I think, than trying to add new syntactic features, like to add new int types or something like that to the language. I think that would be a mistake. So I think the way that Node is doing that is completely appropriate. Now, if it turns out that it is proven that that approach was correct, then I think it would make sense for the ECMAScript committee to look at that and say, well, maybe we should incorporate that into the language spec itself so it'll be available in all environments, not just in a particular server.
So Thomas, Elaine, and Joe, and Tentic, you've all written a ton of JavaScript too. I wonder, do you all feel that JavaScript is kind of a horrible language too, or do you have different perspectives on it? I know in particular, Joe, you've spent a lot of time in a lot of different environments and have sort of thought about your own ways to express logic in applications. What are sort of your thoughts on JavaScript to kick that off?
I don't have a lot of complaints about JavaScript. I mean, actually kind of my preferred language for just about anything, if I could, would be Python. And I actually kind of like magic, like getters and setters, but that's just my personal preference. So
there's a magic hat right here.
Yeah. I was really excited about ES4, and I'm all for adding new features to JavaScript personally, but I understand why the brakes have been applied in a lot of cases.
So we were recently in a discussion talking about Silverlight and how Microsoft is kind of de-emphasizing it, and HTML5 all the way, and the Silverlight guys are all cheesed off because they get to use any language they want on top of .NET, and we're stuck with JavaScript. Should we be pushing for a system where we can have other languages, or should we just say, JavaScript's the future, it's always going to be that way, we're never going to get all the browsers to support it, and so we should just go with JavaScript?
Yes.
I mean, JavaScript's won, right? Like, why is this even a debate anymore?
Against all expectations, JavaScript has become the most important programming language in the world. It's not something anybody wanted or asked for or expected, but it happened. And there are a lot of people who would like to have a do-over. But you don't get to do that.
I have a hypothesis to offer for that. I mean, I think that the reason JavaScript is won can be said in 2 words: view source.
Speaking of another language that people really enjoy, CSS. We've talked to a lot of content providers. We're out talking to some media companies about their layout, and they weren't totally happy with being able to kind of fulfill on all of their needs. What's going on in the CSS community, and how are we kind of really getting in there to help developers so they can do things like align things in the center in a non-crazy way and things like that?
So CSS is a good area that sort of draws that contrast of the question you were asking before about documents versus applications. Because CSS was definitely designed for documents, and that's the vision, that's how it works, that's the layout, how the layout works, even positioning or floats, so all of that, all the hacks we've come up with, it's all taking these document concepts and trying to make them work for applications, which, frankly, is always awkward. I was having a conversation with Doug, actually, a little while ago about, well, why haven't we fixed this problem in CSS? Like, why don't we have CSS for apps, right? And the answer is sort of twofold. The first is that it's actually really tough to do cross-platform UI. You look at all the lot of work that's gone into YUI. It's really hard. And to do it as a standard is even harder. The second is that what apps really need is some sort of grid layout mechanism, right? That's how apps layouts work. And if you look at, for example, Interface Builder, it's got all these capabilities and features that you cannot do in CSS. So there is some work on that. There's been work by Dave Hyatt and by folks at Mozilla, and most recently by Microsoft on a CSS grid module. So for anyone that's interested in sort of like the future of CSS layout for applications, I recommend you take a look at CSS grid. It's coming along, and I would expect that we're going to see working drafts published real soon, and with prototype implementations in browsers in the coming months. So it's a really exciting area right now.
How does that relate to like the VBox, HBox stuff that's also going on in CSS?
So VBox, HBox, which a lot of people might know is sort of Flexbox, is, again, some of the similar kind of thinking, like how do we do app-style layout in CSS? And it's worked in some cases and not others. So I would say that those have been some really good experiments. But what we really need to do is take into account all the lessons we've learned. And that's really what's going on in the CSS working group right now. It's all that's going into the grid work.
Did that bizarre CSS3 module that had you mark up your page using an ASCII picture of the page, did that go away, or is that still kicking around?
Oh, God. Still there?
Let's just say that there are a lot of bizarre CSS modules. And the CSS working group is actually reasonably open to go participate in the mailing list, www style. If anyone wants to go and pick up and work on a module, you can kind of do that. You can kind of draft it. The wiki is open. I think a lot of people don't realize just how low the barrier to participation really is. It's basically just takes initiative.
Yeah. So, Joe, you did a lot of work with Flexbox in the land of Zool. How could that, kind of solve the problems compared to the layout stuff that you've been able to work with in iOS and elsewhere?
Yeah, I came to take Flexbox for granted in 2000, 2001, and thought it would be on the web, in Zool. I thought it would be on the web within a few years, and here we are a decade later. So that's kind of disappointing to me. I mean, Flexbox is an amazing layout tool, and yeah, it's coming soon, I guess. I have to say, though, on the topic of CSS and apps, you can make fun of, joke about CSS, but when you have to live without it, when you're writing native apps, you really learn to miss it, and the whole cascading model and selectors, and when you're writing native apps, having to style each component individually becomes, a real drain. And so wood developers don't know how good they have it with CSS.
So before we get to another question, this will be the last question we ask before we direct to the audience. So if you have a question, please queue up at the microphone. We'd love to start getting you all involved. So we have another question. Let's go to Doug. Doug, so what's going on in the ECMAScript standards committees these days?
We've got this thing called Harmony. So after the very difficult ES 3.1, ES 4 debate, we instead published ES 5. And that's now going into implementation and has already started showing up in browsers. The working title for the next edition, we got smart. We're not giving it a version number because that would be stupid. That'd be like calling your project HTML5, for example. Because we don't want to presume that this is what the next edition is going to be. Because there are a whole lot of things that could happen. There might be a need for an emergency publication, which could screw up the numbering, or it might be that this one gets abandoned the way that ES4 did. We don't know. So we're calling it Harmony. I mean, it turns out companies do that too. They give their projects working names, and then eventually it becomes 3.0, and everyone goes, oh, yeah. So Harmony is proceeding slowly and carefully, as it should. All of the bad feelings that we had in the past seem to have gone away, and we're all very happy working together. I cannot predict at this point what is going to be in the next edition. I really don't know how it's going to turn out. I'm hoping, my idea that the most important feature we could add to the next edition is going to be some sort of modules. Some way for a piece of code to say, this is my interface, and you can't get at my internals. You can only go through my interface. We have a limited ability to do that with functions, but We need an alternative to the global object for binding stuff together, and I think a module system would do that. We've had a couple proposals for such things. Most of them turned out to be way too complicated and are trying to solve problems that I'm not sure that we actually have. It's not clear that any of those will succeed. I think we would be better off to do nothing than to do the wrong thing. I'm very happy to see you nodding. That there are other standard bodies who feel sort of the opposite. It's better to do the wrong thing than nothing. But we'll see how it goes.
So Ryan, in building an event-based system, that Node has changed a little bit on the API side from callbacks, and there's promises and futures and all this stuff that people are talking about. How do you deal with the potential spaghetti code kind of situations that you can get into when you're building these large systems?
Right, so it's an evented system like the web browser, but you don't have the ability to make an HTTP request and wait on that line of code for the response from the server. You have to give it a callback, and so you kind of have this indentation level that goes in for every sort of action that you make that involves I/O. If you add two numbers, obviously, you don't need to do that. And it feels very strange to do that at first because you're kind of used to these systems where you say, database, give me response, and response, now make other database call. But I think that people get used to it. You turn your code inside out, but it doesn't necessarily become spaghetti code. And so I would think, I think that you just change your mindset a little bit. And I mean, it doesn't have to indent many times. I mean, you just give functions names, and you don't use many anonymous functions. You just kind of do it like that. But it's different, but I don't think it's necessarily worse.
So let's take our first question.
Hey, I'm Derek. I'm an engineer here at Yahoo. And my question is, I guess now that the YUI team last week announced that grade A browser support for IE6 or it will be dropped from grade A browser support early next year. First of all, let's give a handout to YUI for that. So it appears that IE6's reign of terror might be coming to an end. If so, are we going to run into any other IE7 or IE8 issues? And, or are we going to have any other issues going forward that inhibit open web innovation?
I've got to tell you, I've got IE9 issues. So we with the support of Microsoft, we published ES5. Microsoft provided the editor and did a lot of the design work for ES5. I'm very, very happy with ES5. ES5 contains a strict mode, which allows us to have a partial solution to the mashup problem. So we can have third-party code with static validation, so we don't have the transformation and runtime stuff, runtime checking that we've got with Caja. We really need that, and IE9 appears to not have that. Microsoft is reluctant to say whether or not they're going to have it when it goes final. They've resisted all my queries, yes or no, are you going to implement the standard? Are you going to be standards compliant or not? They say, oh, we can't comment. So if they do it, then great, hooray for Microsoft for getting it right. And if they don't, then IE9 joins the list of IE versions that have to die.
So I think we're going to have issues with every browser forever, and that's the nature of open web development, like open web platform. In fact, any platform. Can anyone name a platform they've never had any issues with? Of any version? Nope? Okay, well, there's still opportunity for someone to build it then. Yeah, I think that one of the things we've learned with web development is you have to code for progressive enhancement, you have to code for graceful degradation, and you have to cut that off wherever you see it fit as far as like market share of devices or browsers or whatever. And that's up to you in each individual site and application. I think IE is definitely going to be a challenge in the future. My pet peeve right now with IE is geolocation. So geolocation used to be a native-only feature that you can only get on phones through native apps. It's now a W3C candidate recommendation. Every modern browser supports it, except one. Yeah. So when are we going to see geolocation IE?
So I want to ask you a follow-up question to that.
Sure.
Because I think one of the challenges with IE9 is that it calls itself an HTML5 browser. And HTML5 has sort of run away as this marketing keyword that indicates, new browsers that do cool new things, when in reality, HTML5 as a spec bores me to death, and it's the Friends specification, CSS3 and web workers and all these others that really contain, in my view, the good stuff. But we have no sort of tag.
What do you have against audio and video?
Oh, yeah.
Those
are in Canvas. Canvas, that's true. But there's so much stuff that's outside of HTML5. So are we sort of going to have a world where we actually call all these other specs and HTML5 by some thing that we can look to browser vendors to implement? Or are these implementers just going to continue to pick and choose according to what they think is right?
I think the implementers will continue to pick and choose. And the question of naming, does anyone have a better suggestion for a name for something? Bruce Lawson recently suggested Newt for new and exciting web technologies. No joke. I think he was serious. Some people have called it Web 3.0. I don't know. HTML5 to me means the spec because that's unambiguous. I can point to a URL. I know what I'm talking about. But most browser vendors seem to refer to HTML5 as HTML5, all these APIs and everything, right? Yeah. So with Microsoft, what are they referring to? The spec, or are they referring to all the APIs? What do you think?
I think it's clear they're referring to HTML5 and a subset of other related specifications.
Right. So until they implement things like geolocation, they don't get to call it an HTML5 browser. Sorry. Not in their definition. So they can change their definition, or they can code it. Their choice.
So we should call them, right? Let them know. So is there anything like that you guys can do to sort of address compatibility, to sort of say that you have to do these things to be called HTML5? Are you going to have like a brand in the future? Are you moving in that direction?
Well,
it's just going to be hell for the practitioners?
W3C tried to trademark a standard in the past. Do you guys know which one that was?
CSS?
XHTML. So XHTML is actually a trademark at W3C. And how well did that work out? All right.
Probably wasn't its biggest problem, though.
Right. Or another standard, I'm putting that in quotes loosely, Java, right? That's also been enforced through legal action. And how well has that worked out? So I don't think that you're going to actually get standards to succeed using lawyers. I think you get standards to succeed using developers.
Okay. Next question.
Hi, I'm Matt. Node.js is hot right now, but we've had JavaScript on the back end for a long time. So now that there's so much momentum behind Node.js, are we seeing any activity amongst other back-end runtimes like Rhino to try and catch up, to make it easier to write servers and code in JavaScript that interacts with the environment like you can with Node.js?
Yes, that's for me. Yeah, I think there's some work to make compatible environments for other runtimes. So there was a project for the .NET JavaScript, which I don't know what the name is, and there's a project for Rhino that uses the Java non-blocking I/O stuff. But all of these projects are very in their infancy, even more so than Node itself. I mean, Node is a moving target, so I would imagine that it will be a while before you can. I would hope that we kind of coalesce on this API that Node is presenting, but I think it's going to be a while before you can write portable Node code.
We were just at a company that was using Ringo.js, which is the old Helmer code that's on top of Rhino, and they chose that because they had a ton of Java libraries that they wanted to integrate with. And so people are looking around, seeing what's out there.
So I can add something really small to that. If Node's awesome, I mean, I've never met Ryan before, and I think it's awesome. Well done. If you can install that and run with it and develop on it, I think that's the future. I think that at some point, hosting platforms will actually include Node by default in general. Like right now, what can you depend on your arbitrary hosting platform? Anybody?
PHP.
PHP, right. And that's pretty much it. So I would say that if you can install and run Node, do it. And if you can't, or if you just want to hack around, there's actually an intersection of JavaScript and PHP that you can write and run. So look up Cassis project, and it's definitely a hack. I'm not ashamed to admit it, and check it out.
It's a JavaScript on top of PHP, or
no? It's taking.
Say more about it.
So Cassis basically. I noticed that the syntax of the languages were close enough that there's a big enough intersection that you can actually write code that runs in either one natively, and that's what Cassis is. It's code that runs as JavaScript or PHP natively, and is set in a library of functions that abstract out things like string concatenation that have different syntaxes in the languages. So it implements like stir copy, and basically re-implements a whole bunch of C library functions that a lot of us are familiar with. So I'm using that now.
How do you spell Cassis?
CASSIS. Yeah. For client and server scripting implementation subset.
So if you think about the best and worst of JavaScript and PHP together, that's the solution for you. So next up, yeah.
Hi, I'm Matt with Mozilla. Question about different philosophies toward writing front-end code. There's the group of people who really consider front-end code a craft and something that you do by hand in a text editor. And there's this new generation of people who treat the front end as a compile target. You write in an abstracted language and you push build, and at the end you have an web application. I was wondering what the panelists had or their thoughts on the two different approaches and how they feel.
Mean to segment the audiences there in terms of like the new kids and like the old experienced trader?
I mean nothing by what I'm asking. No.
Any GWT users in on the panel?
Doug's a big fan of GWT, I think.
I expected to hear like that.
And people can do any stupid thing they want. I don't care. I'm not going to get upset about it. It amazes me that JavaScript is now doing what Java was supposed to do. So Google wants their Java code to run everywhere, so they translate it into JavaScript.
Next question coming along.
Okay, I'm actually interested in Chris coming up because there was a comment before about view source being very important, and I think I just saw a presentation from Chris talking about how the era of view source is maybe not with us right now. So maybe you could have some thoughts about the importance of view source and how it's maybe not as important anymore in the new world of apps, or is?
Well, I'm giving a talk tomorrow about progressive enhancement. The funny thing is that the notion was saying that JavaScript succeeded because of view source, and if you do view source, the JavaScript rendered stuff doesn't show up unless you use Firebug. But the more important thing about that is that to me the new view source is on code repositories rather than in live code, because most of our websites are actually rendered according to performance standards or actually rendered for different browsers. So when you do a view source on Chrome, you get the Chrome code. When you do a view source on Internet Explorer 6, you get Internet Explorer 6 code. It means you have a different representation of the same website if they were specialized for performance. So that was the thing that I talked about there. So saying the one-size-fits-all approach in a size of Google, Yahoo, or eBay doesn't work anymore. So the view source argument is like, this is where I learned from, is actually terrible because you should learn from code repositories rather than what people do in live code. But my question actually was more interesting. So yeah, Chris here from Ajaxian. I was wondering about security. Let's talk a bit about this. With like Firesheep and with things like Evercookie, HTML5 and all the new APIs inside the browsers that actually get me excited about HTML5 also come with a lot of security flaws. There's no encryption for local storage, for example. So what do we do about this, or where do you see the main dangers there? Like something like Meebo with their toolbar being distributed all over the web and wonderfully usable, but also if there is a security flaw, we would make the whole social web attackable. So how can we work around these issues, and how can we make people in the hype that we have right now listen to security? I just came from a conference about entrepreneurs, and one guy on stage basically said, like, you can't be creative and innovative if you think about security. And I left the room because I'm sorry, I don't want to breed a lot of idiots as developers. I want to build things for the future that actually are not taking over people's computers. What do we do about security, and how do we make people understand
Let's hear what
the
everyone
problem?
on the panel has to say about that, except for Doug. Let's just keep him.
He's got no interest in that.
Yeah.
Tentic, well, let's have Tentic. Did you want to?
Elaine wants to say something.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to address, I applaud you for bringing it up, because especially as a company that is developing third-party applications, it's something that we've thought about really deeply. And we spent the last 6-8 months building our entire Meebo bar to be within iframe, so that the data that we are presenting is not something that the page at large can actually see. And so now we've done that, and that's fantastic. But for us, the main challenge is trying to present that to the users so that they know that their information, that this whatever the buddy list or whatever is being shown at that moment cannot be viewed by anyone other than them. And so it's trying to make sure that the user knows the difference between HTTP and HTTPS. It's just there's a lot of education in that.
Did that take an enormous amount of effort to achieve that sandboxing, or was it?
Yeah, it was unreal. I mean, this was a team that was accustomed to doing 2 to 3 week releases, and as a company, it was a real risk for us to be able to take on a 6 to 8 month release that was essentially a researching endeavor to figure out how we could do the cross browser communication, how we would be able to draw it all so that it would still, and to be able to publish it all so that we didn't have any performance degradation, and we need to get out more in the community and share what we've done and how we've approached it.
Did you have?
Sure. Two-part answer. The first, Firesheep, if you haven't heard of it, exposes some flaws, essentially, in how we use the web with cookies in HTTP. The short answer is there. Any site that does any authentication is going to have to go to SSL. I don't have any other answer to provide there. It's not a great answer, but I'm open to hearing other ideas. And second, you mentioned HTML5, you mentioned EverCookie. I think the answer there is economics. In other words, how many of you know what exploit kits are? Anybody? Ever heard of them? Okay, these are actually for sale programs you can buy, install, and run to take over people's machines. So if you treat this as a market problem, how has the market decided where the security vulnerabilities are? Anyone know where the top security vulnerabilities are in your browser right now? Nope. Extensions is not it. Next.
Flash.
Not Flash either. Not plugins. Java. The #1 exploit vector right now that commercial exploit kits are using successfully is Java. And there's been a lot of hype, a lot of chicken littling about HTML5, about EverCookie. It's all crap. Okay? None of that is being used by exploit kits. Commercial exploit kits are using Java. So if you're worried about security, the #1 thing you can do in your browser is to turn off Java. I hate to say it.
You lose all the great applications that you'll get.
Like the old Facebook photo uploader, for example.
Yeah.
All right, Doug, you can go now.
Unleash the hound.
Right. Sorry.
The problem with HTML5 and its friends, are we calling them that?
I like Newt, actually. Can you use Newt?
Okay, the problem with Newt, with Web 3.0, 4.0, is that they didn't solve the cross-site scripting problem before adding powerful new capabilities to the browser. So we have a local database now and local storage. The attacker gets full unfettered access to that stuff and can do whatever he wants with it. So there are lots of new ways it can do evil that weren't possible before HTML5. And in my view, it was irresponsible of W3C to be adding these powerful new capabilities without first correcting a security problem that we've been suffering under for 15 years. That they went and did all this shiny new stuff instead of fixing the fundamental problems first. I think that was intolerable.
Just to echo that point, I think one of the themes that were mentioned earlier at the start of this panel was, do we necessarily want more features? Because the aspect of security isn't just matter the code vector, but actually the social engineering aspect of it. And a lot of the participants on this panel, and certainly a lot of the applications that are being developed, are meant to be shared, meant to be interactive with applications and code outside of your control. If those vectors are not addressed, you've increased the attack vector substantially when you take the user interaction into account. The user may not necessarily know what's going on. That's probably the most dangerous foible out there. And adding all these new features basically is turning the device, the environment, into a pretty scary place. And I realize that may be a bit alarmist, but if you expose geolocation capabilities freely, and you have a compromised application, it doesn't necessarily have to be a code exploit. If someone just manages to get access to that environment, you're known. Now, I don't know whether or not that scares anybody. It scares me. It's a terrifying concept. You can allow a proliferation of all these new features, but you have not guaranteed the integrity of your application nor that of your user. What have you accomplished?
So the browser is closer to being a secure application delivery system than everything else. And that will be one of the web's best features going forward. But we're not quite there, and so it's a false promise at this point.
But Doug, doesn't Apple protect this by filtering the apps in their app store?
Yeah. No, of course not.
Hi, this is Subramaniam from the Mail team. I had a follow-up question to the previous questions that was asked. In terms of this group being considered as the new kids on the block, it's basically goes back to hiring. We say all companies complain that we cannot hire good front-end engineers. So do you think, I personally got into this line because of interest and the ability to push out things that are really cool and have lots of people use it. But do you think it actually makes sense to go out there by big companies like Yahoo and Google to make it into a regular curriculum like so many other technologies out there?
So we can't hire good engineers. It's incredibly hard to find them. So how do we grow them?
Yeah, we have to make them. But historically, we had people who called themselves webmasters. This is going way, way back. And generally they weren't very smart. But they figured out how to bring up Apache, and they could do a little bit of Perl, and that was enough to build a website. And there were a lot of hobbyists who kind of got into the web that way. The thing we found is that that's not a good way to do this stuff. And so one of the things that has been done at Yahoo that makes me very proud of this operation is that we invented the discipline of front-end engineering here. That we saw it as being a discipline that required a very large set of skills. And so we've been training people inside, we've been trying to train the world outside in the large set of skills that you need in order to create these applications. The world is still full of webmasters, though, and it's difficult when you're trying to hire front-end engineers and you just get all these webmasters.
I look at back in 2005 when we were starting to hire our initial team, and at that time it felt like, I think it's actually better now than it was then, because at the time trying to find somebody who was willing to tackle building an entire JavaScript framework from scratch, they were rare diamonds. And now at least there's a lot of enthusiasm, and people are playing around with all the open source initiatives. And I initially got into JavaScript by looking at Rico. many, many years ago. And so I think that there's just a lot more to play with, and it's a lot easier to pick up than it was back then. So
today's webmasters are jQuery plugin monkeys.
They are, and it makes reviewing resumes a little bit more difficult because there's a higher signal-to-noise ratio, but at least most people who are interested in JavaScript, they have a website. You can go to it, and you can kind of get an initial read of the person, so that's helpful.
Hi, my question is around frameworks like Titanium, RowMobile, and a lot of other frameworks which kind of promotes building native applications using JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. So specifically, Joe, what do you see the future as? I mean, as a new engineer who wants to build some mobile applications, should they start doing them native using Objective-C or whatever the platform supports, or should adopt like RowMobile or Titanium, which builds abstraction layer using JavaScript and HTML?
I would honestly recommend learning native development first if you're looking to do mobile development, mainly just because there's just much more opportunity there job-wise. And let me look at the mobile web. Is there any like obvious standout mobile web application? Maybe that's an opportunity if you're new.
Netflix.
Netflix. Standout, not just.
Okay, so my question is more regarding WebSockets. I know Ryan had touched on this a bit when he said that Node.js might be a good push towards more real-time applications. How do you see WebSockets and maybe these libraries like Socket.io that abstract, all the browser complications? How do you see this fitting into the future of front-end development? And do you see it as kind of a niche area that's only for certain applications, or could it potentially be a replacement for Ajax as a whole?
Yeah, so Socket.io is this library that allows you to use WebSockets basically on any browser, which is just insane, right? Because WebSockets just came out. But it turns out that since IE 6, you could do this by doing long polling. And there's all these different tricks to kind of allow the server to push events to the browser. And Socket.io abstracts all of these different ways of doing this out into a nice, simple WebSocket-like library. And then you have a server-side counterpart, which can take the Flash socket connection, or can handle the long poll, or can take the real WebSocket connection, and kind of give you this seamless integration where you literally can write WebSocket code on all browsers. So this is great. Like, now you can write real-time websites on every browser. I kind of think that there's always going to be room for the traditional CRUD website in the same way that there's still room for the traditional static website, right? I don't think those things are going away, but I think we will see a new class of websites that are games.
So related to that, we've made this move to Ajax. Now iOS is showing us how to do really rich applications. The standards are giving us things like WebGL, CSS 3D, transforms, transitions, all of this rich stuff, WebSockets. How are webmasters going to deal with that stuff? Like, how is this community going to be able to kind of come in and build these really rich experiences? Is there going to be the jQuery of HTML5? Are these things going to slowly just kind of go into our libraries? Where do you think we're going to go?
Stay in school.
Never stop learning.
Yeah, there's probably going to be some, YUI will suck this all up into its hulk, and then and whatever, you'll use Dave Glass's library, and you can create DOM templates on the server side and push. Who knows? But you would kind of imagine that this stuff will kind of get pulled together in some sort of reasonable fashion. But at the moment, it's also new, that just kind of here and there.
So I'm not sure which of you to direct this to, but obviously the iOS ecosystem has exploded by giving developers a monetization path through the sale of packaged apps or through ad-based monetization of packaged apps, but primarily through the sale of packaged apps. Is that needed on the web? Is that the answer? Should, Mozilla is now standardizing some technologies that will allow you to package up a website as a standalone installable bundle. And we've seen the Chrome Web Store sort of evolve to a similar point. Is that really what we should be doing as a community, or should we focus on the traditional monetization model that I think people like 37 Signals pioneered of selling subscriptions to web-based services? What are some of your perspectives on what we should be doing as far as apps on the web?
I can start with that one. I think usability is the right place to start. I think that if you look at the Apple App Store, yes, it looks like, oh my gosh, there's a revenue stream here. As a developer, I can make a lot more money here than what am I going to do with a website. But the things that really distinguish good apps are not just the monetary value, but frankly, a good app is a smoother user experience. And part of that experience is installation and uninstallation and all of that. And that's something that I believe that the Mozilla sort of open web app framework is trying to help stir the discussion around. Like, how can we make the entire experience of using what you might call an app on the web a smoother user experience? If we make things easier for users, they'll be more than happy to pay developers for it. But I think that's the order you need to go in. Make it easy and convenient for users, and then they'll pay you money.
It's interesting that more and more of the apps have been switching to the ad model away from the paid model. So that bodes well for the web, I think.
That's sort of the history of the web again. Again, back in the old days, the thinking was that micropayments were going to be the thing that was going to drive the web. That your computer would have some money in it, and every time you looked at something or clicked on something, a little bit of money would get debited, and that would pay for everything. And that completely failed, and the only thing that was left that worked was advertising. And we're sort of seeing that replaying in the App Store model.
I think it's exciting. I was telling Joe beforehand that I think some of the most beautiful apps that are out there, or some of the most beautiful websites that are out there, are generally designed by a single person. And it's just generally because they have a consistent UI, they have a strong point of view, but the issue is that it's hard to be able to see those applications and to discover them. And so something like, and also to be able to give an engineer the incentive to actually go through and build it. So with that infrastructure in place, I think it's fantastic for engineers to have that kind of opportunity available.
Maybe Yahoo could create a directory of the best web applications and give, anyway. So Eric.
So you guys have all been incredibly successful as in realizing creative ambitions in your lives. That's the thread that draws, I think, all 8 of you together. And when I talk to teachers these days, one of the things that they're really concerned about is, well, let me follow that up. In the way that all of you have been successful, the internet, network technologies, the web has played a really big role in allowing those successes to become to blossom, really. Teachers are really struggling with this, teachers at the college level and even younger, with what it means to build kind of a baseline literacy for students graduating from high school or graduating from college to have the opportunity for whatever their creative ambition is in whatever discipline, and you guys span a bunch of disciplines among you, to really allow whatever their ambitions are to blossom. And I'm wondering, as we think about this moment in time where front-end engineering is becoming immensely more complicated, in some ways harder, is it even possible to define a baseline literacy that you would want all college graduates who are coming to your organizations looking for jobs, or your own kids, to have, just sort of not uniquely to be an engineer, but as a baseline to be a full participant in whatever's going to happen over the next 20 years? Feel free to take a lot of time.
So I'll say one thing. I've worked with a lot of programmers over the years, and the best ones never seem to be the computer science majors. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but it was always like the music major that was like this amazing programmer. Right? It was like the biology guy that like thought really differently. And there's kind of this, my wife's a teacher, and you're always trying to intrinsically motivate people and all of that kind of good stuff. And I think a lot of our education is this kind of rote learning. And for me, I did computer science, and there was a lot of that you kind of got to go through this, and this. And having background knowledge is great. But the best teachers for me were always the people that helped me think about things differently and all that kind of stuff. So while we need to have better ways to kind of set out this baseline education, I think we also need better ways to kind of allow people to be creative in the way they think about things and stuff.
In a sense, it's an incredibly depressing observation, though, because I'm a history major myself, so I understand what you're saying. But is it the music majors just stand out in your mind because you're like, well, I mean, that's unusual? I mean, surely you're not saying that the computer science majors in general kind of suck compared to the music majors, right? I mean, it's kind of depressing that the way we prepare people for their craft is by teaching them things that are utterly irrelevant for creating high-quality experiences. Is that kind of what you're saying?
So I wouldn't say that every music major is much better at programming.
No, I get that.
But I definitely think that, my computer science degree, I had the graybeards teaching me all this Lisp stuff that now I appreciate. But at the time, it was like, really? I want to use the new stuff. I want to learn about actually user experiences instead of just like, here's another little programming thing again. Exactly. Here's how to do quick sort again. And I worked at Google, and so I had to go through the interviews. But that's the only time I ever used that stuff. So I think it's much more important to actually get to these other things and what actually users care about, and then kind of work out how to do things from there.
Are there more relevant curricula in academia these days, or are they still teaching how to do like sorts and stuff? Is that...
I'll be the computer science major to stick up for that a little bit. But any of you ever build a website that has problem with scaling out there? Maybe a little bit. Yeah, you might find that that's when you actually need someone that knows computer science, that knows the difference between like order 1, order log n, order n squared, order n cubed, and like why your web servers, no matter how many you throw at the problem, seem to be falling over. Right. That's when a CS major will actually help you solve the problem. Anyone can slop together a website that like works for one person or works for 100 hits a day.
The webmaster.
Right. The webmaster can do that. But you want to build some scales economically, you're going to need a CS person to do that. Sorry.
I would argue that the web has a bigger problem with just poor usability than lack of ability to scale. I mean, there's really most of us, I think, are self-taught front-end engineers because there is no clear, career path for someone who wants to learn how to be a front-end engineer. Computer science, as you're pointing out, teaches only really half or maybe less than half of the skills that you really need. I would like to see that change because, as I think a lot of people are aware, the web has, and software in general has, severe usability problems that could be cured by maybe better education.
So I got a couple more points there. You mentioned music, and I think that something that's interesting there is that a lot of musicians learn how to do what? They learn how to improvise, and that's, frankly, what being a front-end developer is a lot about. And the mention of a baseline level of literacy has the assumption that there can be a baseline, that such a baseline would even be static, and that's not true. Not in front-end development. It's changing so fast that the only real skill that you can consider as a baseline is learning how to learn. Optimize that.
I'm thinking about this more, right? And I'm just thinking about what did I really learn from going through computer science? And I think the thing that I learned was how to creatively solve any problem. And I think that's something that transfers to any, if somebody's interested in music, that transfers, right? Be able to take a large problem, break it down into certain bits, really kind of time box yourself or time box your problem, and be able to break it down very logically. I think that would kind of be my baseline literacy.
Yeah, I think the thing for me, I think computer science suffers a little bit like math. It's like, for me, the way we teach kids math is like, we'll get to my education up here. It's going to the way we teach kids math is like, okay, we're going to teach you music, and all we're going to give you is sheet music. And 10 years in, we may give you an instrument to actually play on it, right? Like, that's the way we teach math. It's not like, oh yeah, throw this rocket and see how it works, and like, let's work it out. It's like, let's just like learn all of these things in algebra and this and there. I feel like in computer science, there was a lot more of that stuff, where it's, I'm going to tell you some stuff to learn so you know how to solve these problems. It wasn't like, what do you want to do? Let's like get together and build something amazing. How do you work in a team? All of these other kind of social things around engineering things as well.
Wait, you learn how to work in a team in school?
You could if it was a good school.
I mean, on the other hand, I think I'm a math person originally, and I mean, I think one of the most important skills that I learned from that is being able to walk into a dark room full of sharp objects and like not be totally, not just, you know, wimp out and leave the room, but to realize that, okay, you know, I can feel these sharp objects in here. And I think that translating those skills to programming, you know, it's not all fluffy sheets and pillows, right? I mean, there's a lot of sharp edges, and being not afraid to go down that corridor is an important skill that people should be taught.
I think the counter to that is constantly seeing companies that just want to build software, that want to build applications, hiring engineers. And I see this time and time again when the engineers know how to navigate through the shark-infested waters and know how to deal with the sharp bits, and they find that their life is all fluffy pillows and sheets, and so they invent problems to solve time and time again. You know, we could just use conventional tools to build this application, but really we should build a framework because it might not scale if we're wildly successful. So, of course, it'll take 18 months. But, and so I think that's a challenge, that we create an appetite in some of the practitioners that go off into enterprise land that they just try and feed. So, yeah.
So elementary school education, what do you guys... Politics?
So actually, you know, while we're talking, Ryan, you know, we talked a little bit about security on the client side, and even though this is a client-side panel, I just wanted to see, what is it like on the node side? I mean, it's a different model. You're not constantly executing, you know, the code that's being served by these websites. It's all in a controlled environment.
Yeah, it's totally different, right? I mean, you control your environment, so you don't have these concerns at all.
Is the eval keyword there? Do you disable it?
Sure, it's there, but it's yours to control, right? You're not sending this code to other people, so it's a very different. You don't have the same security concerns.
My name is Sri from Meta Integration. This is a follow-up question. When Joe mentioned that name me a web app on mobile or on iOS that's good. You know, besides Netflix. So, you know, with iPad, there's an app store there, and, you know, gives a different experience. Then Apple recently announced the App Store for the Mac. So it might not be too long before Microsoft does the same thing with, you know, for Windows. You know, maybe they just want to, you know, go after Google's ad revenue, you know, on the web. So for us, you know, it seems like, you know, bigger companies strategies are going away from the web. So should we be concerned about the job security, or you know, what do you guys think?
What are they going to?
Well, no, we see this over again all the time, that everybody wants the web. You know, they want that business, they want to capture it and turn it back into a closed proprietary system. So we've seen Adobe pursuing that with Flash for a long time. We saw Microsoft pursuing that with Silverlight for a time. Now we're seeing Apple trying to do that. It's sort of a natural thing where if you're a company and you want to own the world, then you have to take the world away and make it yours. And maybe they'll be successful. I'm thinking probably they won't, just because they will not be able to overcome the advantages that come from an open system.
I want to go back to something that Joe said earlier that's got me a little depressed. And I wonder if it has Joe a little depressed, because I'm reading some depression in his eyes there when we're in the web context. But like Joe was saying, that, you know, I mean, as long as the web is just not going to be able to have some of these native capabilities, I'm not going to use it. And a lot of us are in client-side development because we want to create the best possible client experiences that we can. And so is this true? Are we sort of banished to iOS or other proprietary app platforms if we want to create truly cutting-edge experiences?
Well, my motivation has been to try to reach the most people. And the web is the thing that gets you in front of more people than any other technology. And maybe that won't be true in the future, but it's true now, and it's been true for a while. And I think it's likely to remain true.
I guess from a UI perspective, being able to see all of the development in the apps actually has me really excited, because you talk about how browsers, they may lag, but they are always careful about not having premature optimization or building features that aren't necessary. And so with all of the other different product innovation that's going on right now, it's exciting because you can see this other environment where there's a lot of experimentation, and then be able to borrow from it and be able to bring it back to the web when we're sure it makes sense. But the other thing that's really exciting is that then the users are becoming more familiar with those different types of paradigms. So then when you do introduce it, then users won't have that initial, they'll be accustomed to it. You won't be inventing something that they're not ready for.
So apps are sort of this place where we can innovate on really wacky things, and only after the concepts are a little more proven do we sort of roll them back into the mainstream browser platform. That's my thought anyway. So, I mean, it's a little bit scary because then you have all of these different apps and you have to develop for all of these different types of platforms, but at the same time, I think the browser will eventually benefit from it.
So I do think that's where it works, though. The proprietary platforms are doing R&D for the open web platform, right? They're experimenting, and frankly, you know, that lead is ephemeral, right? Like anytime that those proprietary features become popular, and as open web standards developers, we can pick and choose the ones that become popular, take the 80-20 rule, take the lessons they've learned, and do a better job with the open version, and then eventually ship that. Is it going to always lag? Yes. Is the cutting edge always going to be native/proprietary platforms? Pretty much, until they fall behind, right? Like what happened to Silverlight? Right. So it actually takes a lot of money to keep ahead of the open web platform. Not many vendors are being able to do that. Even Microsoft has given up there with Silverlight, right?
Isn't the inherent danger there that someone who does that research then slaps a patent on it?
Great question. Yes. I'll let Doug comment on that.
It is time to close the patent office.
So I want to ask a related question quickly, and that's on the notion of like these proprietary platforms doing the R&D and then the open web can catch up. Is there a scenario where iOS runs away and continues to dominate sort of an innovation and potentially leverages some of that dominance in the new emerging consumer-oriented OS segment that's now opening up with this sort of merging of iOS and OS 10? And will they at some point just say, you know what, the only browser that's going to be allowed on OS 10 desktops is Safari, and we kind of love the web so much we're going to leave it as it is, and we're going to evolve on the proprietary native platform, and a large, ever-growing segment of users will be stuck with a static web. Is that something we should be worried about?
I don't know if we should be worried about it. I mean, that might play out that way. I mean, Apple is probably hoping that it does play out that way. The risk they take is if they produce a system which cannot address the web in a first-class way, then they're going to fall behind. You know, it depends on how much value remains in the web.
I think the evidence to date has shown that Apple is increasing innovations in Safari and WebKit, not decreasing or slowing down. So if we just look at, you know, the data we have, they're not slowing down the web platform either. They're just trying to keep their native platform ahead. I think there's nothing wrong with that.
Okay. This will be the last question.
Speaking of ways to tackle platform innovation, what do you guys think about initiatives like Chrome Frame and like its feasibility for long-term adoption?
I think it's really cute. But I don't think it's going to get adopted enough that it makes a difference.
Have you heard about the permissions change where you no longer have to be a sysadmin to install it? Does that change anything?
Yeah, so if you circumvent Windows security so that, yeah, then you can trick people into installing.
Use important accessibility features.
That's right. Yeah, it's all about accessibility. Even then, I don't think it gets enough places that it matters. It's better just to kill it.
Okay.
Dion, Ben, thanks so much for moderating the panel. Thanks to all the panelists. Join me in thanking our fantastic team. We'll see everybody back here at 9 tomorrow morning for more YUIConf. So take care.